On the 25th anniversary of the O.J. Simpson murder trial, the Arrow Media Group offered me a chance to look back and reflect what led up to the not guilty verdict. I was interviewed for about 6 straight hours, and it was part of a larger documentary, a 2-hour production that aired on the Discovery ID channel, O.J. and Nicole in American Tragedy. And the documentary detailed all the major components of the trial, paying special attention to domestic abuse. I was one of the reporters interviewed for the doc. The other was Jim Newton, a brilliant reporter and my press colleague at the time from the Los Angeles Times. Here now is a collection of the clips that aired in the doc, with a few excerpts from Tanya Brown, Nicole Brown Simpson's sister. In the doc, Tanya read from Nicole's diary and revealed information that had never been heard before about the relationship between O.J. and Nicole in the Brown family. The documentary was very informative and very well done. O.J. grew up in the housing projects in Potrero Hill, just outside San Francisco. He wanted to be a famous, rich, African-American running back.
Speedy Simpson strikes again. One of the fastest men in college football. He's the nation.
And he knew that he had the tools to go do that. When he went to the NFL, he was drafted in the first round by the Buffalo Bills, and the Juice had a wonderful NFL career.
When you're in a rush, take it from O.J. Simpson. There's only one superstar in rent-a-car, Hearst. Others claim to be.
O.J. Simpson was the first African-American athlete in the United States to receive major sponsorship from large American corporations.
O.J., you've had quite a season.
Well, I have gained a few yards.
Your speed must have a lot to do with it.
Well, I ran 109.4.
You ran 109.4?
Yeah, I stopped for lunch.
During that one-on-one interview, the 2 lead detectives noticed a cut right here on the middle finger of his left hand.
How did you get the injury on your hand?
I don't know. Not the first. I know I had when I was in Chicago. I know I was at the house. I was just running around.
How did you do it in Chicago?
I broke the glass. You had one of you guys that just called me, and I was in the bathroom, and I just kind of went bonkers for a little bit.
Is that how you cut it?
It was cut before, but I think I just opened it again. I'm not sure.
Mark, you've been following the story all day long. Would you say that police are any closer right now to having a suspect or suspects in this case?
Although O.J. Simpson has not been arrested or charged with any wrongdoing, he does appear to be the main focus of this entire investigation.
During that week, they started to build their case against O.J. Simpson. Criminologist Dennis Fong led the efforts at the murder scene to gather as many blood samples and scientific evidence as possible. After they drew blood from O.J. Simpson, they compared the 2 samples, and most of the time it was a match.
What we're seeing here is officers showing a great deal of restraint, and what they're doing is they're waiting for the first move to be made by Mr. Simpson. So far, he is staying inside his vehicle.
And it ended in arrest of a Hall of Fame football player just around 9 o'clock.
Great news, unbelievable, great news. O.J. Simpson just minutes ago gave himself up.
You know, based on Nicole's diaries, I think there were some 60 incidents of beatings that she kept notes about, but they were not allowed into evidence by Judge Ito.
1986. Beat me up so bad at home, tore my blue sweater and blue slacks completely off me. Went to the hospital on Wilshire, claimed it to be a bicycle accident.
The domestic violence situation in itself, I don't believe that a person, just because, say he was guilty of physical abuse, that doesn't make him guilty of murder.
That domestic abuse thing just went right over her head. It did not stick with her. And Jeanette was one of the leaders of the jury.
The prosecution, to me, from what I've seen so far, is just spinning wheels.
The jury became desensitized to the domestic violence abuse, and Marcia scrubbed it. She said, we're going to go forward with the scientific blood evidence that we have, and that's going to be our case.
Ms. Clark.
Good afternoon. Once you see the vast array of physical evidence, you can see that there's virtually an ocean of evidence to prove that this defendant committed these murders.
You cannot convict when the core of the prosecution's case is built on perjurious testimony of police officers, unreliable forensic evidence, and manufactured evidence.
Barry Scheck was brought on to destroy the scientific evidence and point out every little inconsistency that could point to a not guilty verdict.
The evidence from Bundy, the evidence from Rockingham and the Bronco, the evidence from Mr. Simpson itself passes through the Los Angeles Police Department, contaminated, compromised, and corrupted integrity of the evidence.
For every shadow of doubt that Barry Scheck tried to say, the prosecution came back and shored up the evidence gathering process.
Were any results produced foreign to either of the victims in this case, Ronald Goldman or Nicole Brown?
But it was just too technical.
The D1S80 data derives from two sources. The African American and Caucasian D1S80 data is from the...
It was exhausting.
Could you please describe the frequency of the combined type that you produced from DQ alpha in this case?
Keep in mind the charge to jurors, and that is to acquit if there is reasonable doubt.
This would be just DQ alpha.
Just DQ, I'm not asking you to...
And complexity breeds doubt.
June 15th, 1995. The start of the testimony was unfolding nicely for the prosecution. They entered into evidence that it was a very rare pair of extra large brown isotoner gloves and a receipt that clearly showed that Nicole had purchased these gloves and most likely had given them to O.J. Simpson.
During 1990, how many pairs of Eris isotoner leather-like gloves, brown in color, size extra large, did Bloomingdale's purchase?
Approximately 300. These gloves were designed and developed for only Bloomingdale's and were sold nowhere else.
Your Honor, at this time, the people would ask that Mr. Simpson step forward and try on the glove recovered at Bundy as well as the glove recovered at Rockingham.
All right, the record should reflect that, as is our practice with these gloves, Mr. Simpson will have a pair of latex gloves on while doing this.
Handing Mr. Simpson the glove from Rockingham.
That's People 77.
Yes. Mr. Simpson seems to be having a problem placing the glove on his hand.
Let's just be honest. O.J. wasn't a great actor, but on that day, he sold it to the jury that the gloves didn't fit.
It allowed Simpson effectively to testify without taking the oath and without being subject to cross-examination. I've never seen a prosecution allow a defendant to get away with that before.
Right.
O.J. standing up in front of the jury, facing the jury, with still a high degree of likability. And there's all kind of nonverbal communication that's going on there as well. They're finally getting to have their moment where they're close to this famous defendant, and they're looking at him with the gloves.
Fuhrman was the linchpin of the case against Simpson. I wanted to get him to lie in front of the jury and get caught.
You say on your oath that you have not addressed any black person as a or spoken about black people as in the past 10 years, Detective Fuhrman.
That's what I'm saying, sir.
So that anyone who comes to this court and quotes you as using that word in dealing with African Americans would be a liar, would they not, Detective Fuhrman?
Yes, they would.
All of them, correct?
All of them.
And I never got him there until we got him with his own voice.
All right, Mr. McKinney, would you face the clerk, please?
More and more people began to come forward with different little stories that the defense team investigated. And it eventually led them to this writer.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. McKinney.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cochran.
Ms. McKinney, what is your occupation?
She popped out of nowhere and she said, hey, wait a minute. I've been listening to the testimony and I think I might have something I want to tell you.
I asked him if he would be interested in helping me give some ideas, some personal views that might help generate some thoughts about characters and police procedures. And so we agreed to meet again and tape the interviews.
Now, during the time that you talked with Mr. Fuhrman, did he ever use the racial epithet, which I'll call the N-word, during the course of your conversations with him?
Yes, he did.
Can you tell the jury how many times you've counted that he used that word?
Approximately 42.
42 times?
Yes.
This was a moment for me as a court trial reporter that I just happened to pop up and said, whoa.
She is a female. She's a policeman in the city. And don't you ever fight or around with a policeman. You do what you're told. You understand?
First thing, anything out of mouth for the first 5 or 6 sentences is a lie.
They created a gigantic problem for prosecutors in the sense that he denied under oath using the N-word, and then there's a tape that shows him using the N-word. I mean, he's just lying. There's just no two ways around it.
And I'll tell you this because I'm speaking from experience. When black men and black women heard that in the trial, it felt like he called all of us that name. You have a white cop talking about what he would do using that vile, despicable language. Done. They could have stopped the trial then. That was it.
You may reject the whole testimony. You can then wipe out everything that Fuhrman told you, including the glove and all the things he recovered in the glove. That's why they're so worried.
Johnny Cochran has wrapped up his initial closing argument in front of the jury. Today, he has focused much of his comments about former Detective Marc Fuhrman. It would appear that Cochran was trying to draw that bridge between Marc Fuhrman, the racist, Marc Fuhrman, a man who could have planted the glove. How successful was he, in your words?
Well, Mark, he was speaking directly to that jury, and you must understand that the majority of that jury is made up of African American.
The O.J. Simpson trial was about race from day one. I get word that the jury in the O.J. Simpson case has a verdict after only 3.5 hours of deliberating. People just started showing up outside the criminal courts building. I mean, in mass.
It's one of the great cliffhangers of the year. What did the jury decide to do with O.J. Simpson, guilty or not?
We've all been waiting this long for this moment, so obviously everybody's a little excited.
Any reporter who thinks he or she knew what was going to happen is 100% wrong.
I don't think he can be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
My gut says that he's guilty, that they came back with a second-degree murder conviction.
All right, Mrs. Robertson, would you, do you have the envelope with the sealed verdict forms, please?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, would you give those to Deputy Trower?
I remember sitting in the courtroom. I had this anxiety, this sick feeling in my stomach.
I would caution the audience during the course of the reading of these verdicts to remain calm.
It's kind of like when you're on a roller coaster and you're going up the hill.
The bailiffs will remove any persons disrupting these proceedings.
Am I almost there? Am I at the top?
Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury?
Oh my God, just say it.
Mrs. Robertson.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 1.
Yeah.
60 or 70% of white people thought he was guilty, and 60 or 70% of black people thought he was innocent.
I think it's great. He deserves to go free. They had no evidence on him.
So much evidence to deliberate for as short as they did and come back with a not guilty verdict.
It was O.J. Simpson on trial, but they flipped the switch and they put Marc Fuhrman and the Los Angeles Police Department on trial. And that's one of the reasons how they prevailed.
I think this jury sent a message that the time has come here in Los Angeles and in America that indeed there must be a level playing field for everybody.
All right, the defendant having been acquitted of both charges, he is ordered transported to an appropriate sheriff's facility and released forthwith.